I found that something happens when you're like, okay, if this outcome never happened that I want, giving birth, if it never happened, can I make peace with that?
I'm Heather Grish, and this is the Wisdom of the Body podcast. This podcast explores the idea of body intelligence as the real key to learning the knowledge of life, or what we call Ayurveda in the ancient language of Sanskrit. We do that by connecting with today's creative leaders and experts who will help you listen to your body, trust your gut, and live in deeper harmony with nature. Come join me as we unlock the golden door to clear, direct perception and become very deep listeners. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also follow us by joining my email at heathergrish.com or on Instagram at heathergrish. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. Today, I'm here with Kute Blackson. He is a beloved inspirational speaker and transformational teacher. He speaks at countless events and organizes them around the world, as well as outside events, A-Fest, YPO, which is Young Presidents Organization, and EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization. He's a member of the Transformational Leadership Council, which is a select group of 100 of the world's foremost authorities in the personal development industry. He's a winner of the 2019 Unity Thought Walden Award, and he's widely considered a next generation leader in the field of personal development. His mission is simple: to awaken and inspire people across the planet to access inner freedom, live authentically, and fulfill their true life's purpose. And if you haven't met Kute yet, you are in for a real treat. He's one of the most inspirational people I know, and I'm so excited to have you here with us today, Kute.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate you for having me back.
Well, I'm having you back because we did an interview in, I think it was 2021, early in 2021.
Last year, yeah.
Yeah. And when your book originally came out, when the hardcover came out, and the interview that we did was one of the most powerful ones that my audience gave me feedback on. And in fact, I started to make it required listening for all of my clients.
Wow, I'm honored.
Yeah, it was really that impactful for my audience. And as you know, I wrote a fertility book, and my audiences, not all, but many of them are women who are interested in having a child someday. And that process is extremely frustrating, and it really challenges your relationship with what you can and cannot control in the world. And obviously surrender is such a big piece of that. I mean, so many people were brought to tears by your interview. And, you know, for anybody who hasn't heard that interview yet, that was episode 35. But for anybody who hasn't heard that, could you tell us a little bit about, you know, the magic of surrender?
The magic of surrender. You know, I think in our culture, the concept of surrender there's so many misconceptions about the concept that we have around surrender. This idea that surrender is weak, that surrender is waving the white flag, that surrender means giving up, that surrender means being a victim, being a doormat, that surrender means, you know, sitting there doing nothing and being passive, that surrender means you won't manifest your goals, dreams, and desires, that surrender means you have to sell everything and be a monk in the Himalayas and give everything up and, you know, have a begging bowl. Not a very exciting idea of surrender. This idea that if you surrender, you're going to get less than. And really, what I wanted people to know was, what if surrender was the most powerful thing that we could do as human beings? What if it was the key to our next level, the key to manifestation? What if you didn't get less, but you got more? In the surrender, what if you got more than you could even imagine, more than you could project, more than you could intend, more than you could visualize? What if you got beyond your wildest dreams? And that's why, in essence, the magic piece, the magic of, I don't call it the art of surrender or the power, it's magic. Because, and I'm not talking about like a, you know, David Copperfield kind of, you know, magic trick magic, but magic being that which is beyond our wildest dreams, beyond what we can imagine with our logical, conscious identity, ego-based mind. when we truly surrender, I believe that's when we go beyond ourselves, we transcend ourselves, and then we tap into the infinite possibilities of life and the universe. And to me, in that zone, in that dimension beyond our logic and our identity is where the magic lies. And I think that's when we open ourselves to magic, to miracles, to amazing things. And that's often when things work out better than we can imagine, because in that surrender, we are no longer limited and constrained to our identity, which is rooted in conditioning, which is rooted in our past, which is rooted in our past experience. We're fully available. We're completely available. We've taken the limits off of life. And I think when we take the limits off of life, that's the magic. And often the magic is what we cannot even see or project or imagine. And so surrender is really, just to kind of frame the conversation again, is to let go of trying to control everything and every little thing, at least the perception or the illusion of control. Surrender is when we stop trying to force and manipulate life into how we think it should be based on our limited perception and ego. It's when we let go of the idea of who we think we should be and how we think life should be, so that we can be truly available to the authentic life that is seeking to happen. And many times, we limit the magic, we inhibit the magic, often unknowingly, because we get so attached to how the outcome that we want. We get so attached to how we think things should be. We get so attached to the goals and the desires that we have for ourselves. Not that it's bad, but that attachment often limits our availability, our openness to allowing life to reveal itself, allowing more of life to show us, for allowing life to lead us, because sometimes we're holding on so tightly to it's got to be a certain way, that life is taking us a different way, but we're not open. We're like, no, it has to be this way. And so the magic is that availability, that openness, that receptivity, that flexibility, that allowing, and feeling the deepest impact of what life is seeking to express, feeling the deepest, most authentic expression and integrity of what our soul, what life, what the divine, what the universe is seeking to express through us, and then aligning our actions and our strategies and our logic and our plan in alignment with what's most true. And I think that's when we open ourselves to the magic.
Well, that sounds really, really great. And I don't know why it's such a problem for so many. No, I mean, I think I told you this last time, that when I was planning to interview you last time, I was like nervous. I was like, what am I going to have to let go of? And there was like some fear related to that. And, this resistance piece, I don't know if we're always aware of it. What are some of the ways that you think we become aware that we're resisting?
Well, I think that, yeah, it's funny you say that, like, oh, it sounds amazing. Why are we so? But, I think over the last year, even, I think I've become even more compassionate to the piece of resistance, because the aspects or parts of ourselves that resist the surrender, I think if we can understand what that's really about, then the ability to shift our relationship so with those parts of ourselves, so that we can meet the resistance with compassion, is also part of what frees us. Because often what happens is, we read The Magic of Surrender, we read the Dalai Lama, we read Power of Now, we read all these books, like, I got to surrender, and now I'm not. And then we get frustrated and we start judging ourselves, like, why the hell am I not surrendering more? What's wrong with me? And then the danger becomes we try to force the process of surrender or control the process of surrender, or then we start judging ourselves for not surrendering, which then keeps us stuck even more. And so I think if we can realize that the parts of us that resist, and I'll even break down why, the parts of us that resist is really ego. It's really the ego. And just to set the context also to have the conversation, ego is not something bad, and I forget if we spoke about this in our last conversation, but ego is not something bad, it's not good or bad, it just is. Ego is, people often say, well, ego is the enemy and you got to annihilate the ego, and ego is evil and it's the devil. It's like, no, ego is not even a thing. Ego is a process. It's a process of identification with name, body, form, memories, conditioning, and the degree to which we hold on and identify ourselves to be, that is ego. And so the job of ego, and this is why surrender can seem, and I'm going to say seem for a reason, can seem so difficult, because the job of the ego is to reinforce its existence. And the job of ego is to protect us, to ensure that we will never ever get hurt again like we got hurt before. It's a survival mechanism, and that's why we hold on so tightly. And so I'll say seem, and this is why. When we're born free. As children, we were surrendered. We weren't attached to this or that or this happening. We cry when we cry. We fall when we fall. We poop when we poop. We run naked. We sing. We don't know if we sing good or bad. We're just being pure light, energy, consciousness. We'll run naked. We're not wondering, do I look fat? Or we're just being our radiant selves. We are truly surrendered to whatever the hell is happening. We'll cry. We'll hit our head. We'll cry. We're over it. Then we move on and we're happy again. This is surrender. So what the hell happens? And how does this fear and resistance happen? I think when we can understand that, it can shift a lot. So we're born into this framework of preset conditioning and a framework of preset dysfunction, conditioning. We meet our parents. We incarnate, we meet our parents. Our parents, they're just doing the best that they can do based on their childhood and their conditioning, and they're living in their ego and they're living in their fears and their stuff. And so now maybe we meet mom and dad, and maybe mom is an alcoholic, dad has mental health issues, they're fighting all the time, they're there, they're not there, siblings are fighting, maybe there's divorce, maybe there's abandonment, maybe they're amazing people, but they just don't know how to meet our emotional needs in some way. And so there's levels, and again, depending on our level of experience and trauma, there's levels of pain that we all experience. And so two things happen where the ego or the pattern of control begins to get created and conditioned. Number one, we learn all sorts of strategies, often unconscious, to disconnect and not feel the pain. If I can erect these walls inside of my heart, disconnect from my feelings, I don't have to feel the pain, I can function and survive. A defense mechanism builds up and we start to not feel the pain. And then we start suppressing so many layers of emotion, feeling, suppress. Those layers build up. Now our true light, our true flow, our true essence is kind of buried underneath all of the unfelt, unprocessed layers of emotion. But we've also learned to contort and pattern ourselves into a certain way of being, a certain shape, to never feel this pain again. Now we go through life. What worked for us to not feel the pain when we were 5, that same strategy we take into 15, we take into 25, we take into 35, we take into 45. And now we're still doing that same, disconnected strategy to not feel that pain. And we hold so tightly onto that gets reinforced, and you could say ego, that gets reinforced as a way to control and protect us from never feeling that pain, never feeling helpless like we felt when we were young. And now we're living as adults in that position. I think if we can understand that, we can understand that we're not even resisting. It seems like resistance, but it's just a pattern of survival. And then rather than forcing ourselves to let go, then we can begin to relate and meet that holding, which ends up resisting, that holding with love. Then we could maybe begin to meet ourselves. I think the more we can meet ourselves with that empathy, that compassion, that tenderness, that mercy, that grace, that lovingness, then those parts of us can begin to relax and soften and let go a little bit, just layer by layer, maybe not all at once, but just layer by layer. It's like, oh, I see why you're resisting. I see why you're not fully surrendering and letting go. I see why you're terrified. And when we can meet ourselves with that compassion, I think is when the letting go can begin happening. And so we also, as children, learn strategies to the sense of who do I need to be in order to get love, validation, and approval. So we learn to control our expression. Oh, when I'm quiet, then when I'm loud, then dad screams at me. So I'll be quiet. And so we learn to develop roles and masks and personas and a way of being in the world in order to get love and validation and approval. For me, my father being a minister, preacher's kid, which I think I shared in our first interview, I learned to be the good kid, the perfect son, get all A's, the responsible one, take care of everyone else, be nice, be polite. And there was so much of my own authentic truth, my own, I could never not have a good day. I always had to have a good day, could never have a bad day, could never be not okay. And there was so much of my own humanity and my authentic truth that I had to suppress and put on that mask and smile all the time, that there's so much of myself I betrayed, so much of myself I lost. And so I think it's another pattern of control. We learn to control how people treat us so that we can get the love, the validation and approval based on who we think we need to be in order to get that. That's another pattern of control. We control, avoid feelings, control, get love. And so before you know it, we've become adults, often unconsciously, and we don't even know. We've just become conditioned to become this person. I'm Heather, I'm Kute, this is who I am. And we actually believe that who we end up being patterned into as 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds is who we really are. And for me, we have to really begin to question, is who I am who I really am? Or is it who I've been conditioned to be? Because the degree to which we're conditioned, as in conditioned and holding tightly to what we think ourselves to be, is the degree to which we're not free to let go and surrender. And so that's why now we're conditioned into this way of being. We hold tightly onto this, which is ego. So then it's terrifying for our perceived sense of self to let go. It's like, well, I can't let go because I might experience the pain I experienced when I was 5 again. Hell no. So the resistance has a positive intention. And when we can understand that resistance, it means well, but it's just a limited young way of protecting ourselves. And when we can start becoming aware that we're conditioned, and when we can, in the moment, be conscious of our reactions, be conscious of the way that our conditioning plays out, and become conscious of our roles, our masks and personas, and be conscious of those defense mechanisms as they're happening, then we can begin to witness them. Then we can begin to observe them. Then we can also begin to see that I'm not them. They aren't me. I'm not that behavior. I'm not that survival mechanism. Then there's some space. And I think then there can be some space to witness and observe and begin to make a different choice. And then the willingness to start feeling underneath those survival mechanisms, start feeling some of the sensitivities and feelings and emotions that we've learned to not feel in order to not feel that way again. Because part of the surrender and the letting go is going into the unknown. But the ego, our sense of self, is like, oh, no, we're not going to let you go into the unknown ever again because it wasn't safe and it was so helpless. So that's why we're holding on. When we really get that, then that can open up a whole different way of working with ourselves and our sensitivity to start observing ourselves, to then start feeling some of those gentle layers. Doesn't have to be all at once, but start feeling some of those layers of emotion and feelings that we haven't allowed ourselves to feel, that we are often running from our entire life. When we can feel that and let that go, then we can begin to open again and flow again and trust life again and surrender a bit more. And then we can start getting into the flow. And so I think if we can understand that, it can shift so much so that we can observe ourselves again.
Yeah, Kute, you had shared with me last time about your remarkable upbringing and an environment that a lot of people aren't, it's not a common upbringing for a lot of people. But I think as I listen to you, when I think about these patterns of hurts where we're trying to protect ourselves from that thing, a lot of the examples that you gave, that thing where we felt like we were going to get, hurt in some way, it could be physically, emotionally, or whatever, and we develop these defense mechanisms. But there's also, I think, and you would know way more about this because you've been talking about this subject for so long, is the different types of reinforcement even the positive reinforcement
Yeah,
and
yeah.
things like that could also really keep us stuck, right?
For sure, for sure. Even some of that positive reinforcement where we learn, good girl, always. For me, it was a lot of positive reinforcement. It's like, he's so nice, he's so kind, he never causes trouble, he never creates waves. So for me, I thought, wow, this is unconsciously, right? But there's a part of us that goes, wow, this is how I get love. Good. Fit in. Don't cause waves. Follow the certain line. And so even that seemingly positive reinforcement is how we learn to taught ourselves and start betraying parts of ourselves to get more of that. Yeah. And so we're just not conscious and aware of that as children. It's just the conditioning process that starts happening. And this is where I think as parents also, if we're not conscious of what we're doing and how we're doing and how we're speaking, how we're communicating, we don't realize that we're conditioning our kids to lose touch with parts of themselves rather than providing the space for them to just be free to find out their own authentic truth. And so, yes, even some of the positive reinforcement about things can condition us if we're not aware in limiting ways. So I think it's so important for us to question ourselves. Most of the time, we don't question ourselves and we think we have free will, but we don't. We're just living out the conditioning of our past, the conditioning that we learn to be in because we think that's who we are. And so it's who I am, who I think I am. Who am I? What do I believe? What do I feel? What is true? Who would I be? I think we can ask ourselves the question, well, who would I be if I didn't need to be what I'm being right now? Would I be this right now? What would I say if I didn't need to say what I thought I need to say? Like, am I living the life I would truly live? Is this, I think if we could start just begin questioning ourselves, the questioning of ourselves can be really terrifying because for the ego, it's terrifying because that questioning, to question this version of ourselves that we've become is scary, which is why we hold on, which is why we hold tightly, which is why it's scary. Because to go beyond what we know ourselves to be is to go into the unknown, which requires that we open beyond what we are now, which feels for the ego, which feels like a death. And so, in a sense, part of why we seem to resist surrender, and I said seems earlier, but now I'm remembering why I said seems. But I think part of why we resist surrender and it seems to be difficult is surrender for the ego. It feels like a death of what we know ourselves to be because we believe ourselves to be this limited ego structure form, when in reality, what we are is not our feelings and our thoughts and our memories and our stories and our pains and our traumas. What we are is infinite beings. What we are is consciousness. What we are is pure light. What we are is a manifestation of the divine. We are whole, perfect, and complete, but we've gone unconditioned. Surrender can seem difficult, but I'm going to say something kind of, don't take this out of context, but and if this is just a soundbite, people are going to have a fit with what I'm about to say. But I would say that surrender is easy and natural. That's something I really have been affirming. Like, what if surrender was easy and natural? Because we're like, oh, it's so difficult for all the reasons I just said. And it seems difficult. But if we really step back and look, surrender really is the most natural thing. Based on what I was saying, for those listening in on audio, I'm making a fist and I'm holding a pen. This fist tight holding posture, imagine this is me, this is us, this is who we've learned to become over decades. And it takes a lot of energy to make this fist and hold on tightly to a certain position. But over time, it starts feeling normal. And that's kind of what happens with our resistance. The resistance in our way of being starts feeling normal when in fact surrender, which is just letting go, is what is in fact most natural. It's most natural, but because of our conditioning, it feels scary and unnatural. And that's why I say seems. So I think even if we can just open the conversation, just to have a reframe, not to say it's immediately going to be easy, but the natural state is surrender. The natural state as a child is being surrendered. And so let's just affirm it's easy, it's effortless, it's natural. Now, there might be some layers that we need to unravel so that we can relax back into that natural flow again. But even just holding it as surrender is our natural state. It's what's natural, I think, can reframe the context that we hold it in and make us a bit more available to that flow again. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. And I don't know if you've had, because I know you do coaching. I don't know if you've had any clients that were trying to conceive a child and have been struggling with that, but I just sort of
Oh yeah.
throw it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think even at the end of the day, it kind of feels like, even though, because I went through that journey and that battle myself, it was sort of
Mm,
like it had its own issues and frustrations and things like that, because this thing that I want to have happen is not happening. That's part of it.
mm,
But I think there's this other part of it, which I don't think I quite recognized until later, that people also, it's not on the surface of their minds, is that it's actually really scary to think about having a baby and
yeah.
having that happen to your body. It's like really scary to think about it. I mean, I think about it happening again and I'm scared. What would you say to a person, because I there's so much going on. There's a physical thing going on, there's a mental thing going on, there's like an existential, like, am I going to die question,
Yes.
right?
Look, I will just need to acknowledge that as a male in this lifetime, I am limited no matter how I can tune in. I will forever be limited in my capacity to speak to that experience. First, I just want to say that to all the women. I will forever be limited in my capacity to understand the real reality of what that is. And when I fathom into feeling into the reality of giving birth and conception and birth and everything that goes on in a woman's body, to have that process, like, holy shit, it's like, it's crazy. Like, life is growing inside of you. And here's what's crazier: all of the women on the planet, for like the beginning of time, make it seem so easy. You amazing, you make it just seem so normal, going through life, driving your car, making going to groceries, going to the gym, living life, like, you're growing life and you're doing, like, if for me, if I was giving birth as a guy, I'd be telling everyone on Instagram, I'm giving birth, everyone, every second. I'd be showing off it's like, you women just make it seem so normal, then pump out the baby and go about life. Like, first, we just got to give kudos to all the feminine beings. Whether you're giving birth physically, you haven't, maybe you never do, just that capacity inside of your being and DNA is incredible. Just the frequency possibility is amazing. So I will not fully understand what that is in reality, and the reality, the magic of that, and the urge and the chemical component. What I will say is, I do feel that from a spiritual level, that we are souls. We incarnate into this human experience to learn, to grow, to evolve. And that being the case, life is school for our soul's evolution. Everything is part of that curriculum. And I do believe that we all incarnate with different lessons to learn. And if life is a school where we all have different lessons to learn, then every single situation and every single experience is really part of what is serving that soul's evolution and awakening, and deepening the realization of who we are and reminding us of who we are. And so I just want to say that, just to set the context, to be more specific, that I think everyone has a different soul path and soul journey. And some of that soul journey for somebody might be having a kid and having more than one kid. And then there are going to be women that thought, hell, I never wanted any kids. And then I knew someone, she was like, hell no, I don't want to have any kids. She had 5. Okay. She was just pumping them out. She didn't want any. And I've known women that have wanted kids and they haven't had any. And I just want to say, I think everyone has a different journey. And if we look at it just from the level of the mind, the human, the ego, it's one way. But I think to really surrender and move through, we have to see life as a spiritual process, all of life as a spiritual process, and everything serving every experience in life as a spiritual process. And I think if we're able to do that, it doesn't make it easier, because if you want something, you want something. But I think if we can remember that, okay, life is a process for my soul's evolution, and life is a process of surrender. And even the process of fertility and child giving birth and is still a part of that process. And so it may not be everyone's journey in this lifetime to have that experience for whatever the reason. And we all have different things to learn in the experience and the process and the journey of what that is. And I would just say, I think what's most important is, and I would say the same thing to someone that wanted to manifest a goal or a desire, end result. What's most important is not the end outcome, the thing, the child, the car, the house. What's most important is the journey that you go on and the depths of your own consciousness and psyche that you get to explore and heal and embrace and transcend in the process of that fertility journey. That is as important as the end outcome. Because at the end of the day, that's life. At the end of the day, that is the evolutionary journey. And so I think when we can, no matter what, embrace that and surrender to the lessons, then yes, it's not easy. Obviously if someone wants a child and they don't, I can't, as a woman, I couldn't imagine that and what that would feel like, in reality. I can imagine certain things I've wanted to manifest in my life that haven't happened, and I really wanted them to happen, and the depth of anguish in that not happening because I really thought it was my path. And so I think that surrender, as it relates to that, surrender, it's not about whether we are going to surrender or not, because life is the process of surrender. Everything is really serving that. And it becomes more about how we're going to participate in it. Are we going to participate in it fully, or are we going to resist? But at the end of the day, we can surrender now. We can surrender tomorrow. We can surrender next lifetime, but we will have to surrender. And so I think when we can see life for the evolution and the lessons and even the journey of fertility as a classroom for that evolution, that's really what it's really about. There was a client I had who really wanted to give birth and she had some challenges. I won't go into too much detail, but there were some challenges. And one thing I told her was, if life is a classroom, sometimes when we don't get what we think we want, we try to force, we try to push, and we try to push harder, and we try to force. And I really believe that when we learn the lessons that situation around fertility, that situation is seeking to teach us, when we really learn the spiritual soul evolutionary lesson, it can do one of two things. It can free us up so that we can see the relationship, the situation completely differently and find freedom in the situation. That's one. So we can be in a space of acceptance of, okay, maybe it's not meant to be. And or we can free ourselves up, learn the lessons so that we can energetically, spiritually, karmically, vibrationally shift our nervous system and maybe shift our karma in such a way that the environment shifts in such a way that we've now learned the lessons so that we can move into a different vibrational frequency that then is now fully aligned and available with the manifestation of the child happening. And sometimes the block is not the block. Sometimes the block is in our consciousness. Sometimes the block might be in our own fears, our own unreadiness, our own unconscious, unhealed traumas that are still lurking around, ancestral stuff. So I think one of the things that we have a responsibility to do as we surrender to life is to do our mental, emotional, psychological, spiritual healing so that we can make sure that we've fully done our part to prepare the psyche, the body, the emotion, the energy, the nervous system, the soul to fully be available. And I think as a woman, if you can do that and to heal ancestral patterning and you can do that, then you know at least you have fully done whatever you can do. And from there is grace, it's grace. And so my client, like just as an example, she wasn't going to go. There was an event that was 7 days that she wasn't going to do because she wanted to prioritize her birth. And I told her it's a mistake. And she'd already signed up for it. And if you prioritize your healing, your energy will shift, your karma will clear. That will make you much more vibrationally aligned to be in sync with what is truly highest, to be available to the possibility of that soul coming through because you're even more ready on all levels, not just consciously. Because sometimes you might say, I want a baby, I want a baby. But if another part of you isn't coherently in sync, it may not just, happen. And so I think if someone's able to do that, that is really helpful. The responsibility for your own consciousness work. And I would say, is another piece, I'm kind of throwing a lot out there, and I would say, there is a profound freedom. I'm not saying this is easy. I'm not saying if I was a woman and I really wanted to have a child, I'm not saying I could do it, but I've done it in different areas. I think something really profound happens when you make peace with the possibility that it may never happen. Like, I really want to manifest my soulmate, but it has to happen. It's like, if you could make peace with the possibility, like, what if you never met your soulmate in this lifetime or your life partner and you made peace with that completely? A lot of times we're afraid to make peace with that possibility. So there's still a level of resistance. Like, no. But that subtle holding and resistance creates a contraction where we're not fully open to the highest good. No, we could. But I found that something happens when you're like, okay, if this outcome never happened that I want, giving birth, if it never happened, can I make peace with that? And I think that something really profound happens if you can, not as a giving up, but as a letting go of holding, as a letting go of attachment, when you can acknowledge that, make peace with that reality, grieve that reality. The grief kind of cracks your heart open to another dimension of availability and say, I'm going to make peace with that so that I'm not holding my breath and holding on in any way. Then you're fully available and open. And in that openness is when grace unfolds, is what I found. Then I'm not saying there's a guarantee, certainly not. It's not like, oh, well, I'll surrender so that this can happen. But then you're truly open either way. That brings you into the highest possibility for the magic, is what I have seen in my life, in my client's life. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. And in fact, I totally experienced that. And it's really hard to say, I might not have this. It's
Yes.
really hard to do that. It is such an incredible process to go through that. And that's exactly what I went through. And one of the things I realized is that my mind, my imagination, the fact that I have an imagination and could develop this desire or want for something and imagine it in the future, the fact that I have that actually is a beautiful thing, but at the same time also a curse. Because once we start getting so attached to that thing that we've imagined, then we stop being present. And there's like this unwinding then that has to happen in order to become receptive. And as I was listening to you describe what you were saying, that opening, that grace in that letting go of the desire, but it's your mind's letting go of the desire. It's somehow not the rest of you.
Yeah, yeah. That letting go is where the grace, like I had a client who the doctor said couldn't have a baby. And she'd went to like 7 different doctors around the world, top specialist in Hong Kong, couldn't. When she worked with me, she came to my event, and then like almost like 9, 10 months later, I'm pregnant. I have a baby. It was like she couldn't believe it. And so there's a freedom that happens in that. But in order for that full letting go to happen, we have to allow ourselves to grieve. And that grieving, which is a letting go, can, like when my mother passed away, she was diagnosed with stomach cancer. I write about this in my book. When she was first diagnosed, I had every attachment and intention. I'm going to get her well. I'm going to, alternative therapies, green powders, juices. I'm going to heal my mother, damn it. We're going to F cancer. She had stomach cancer. F that. We're going to hit this thing over the head and, cure her. And I realized in a few months that she wasn't going to heal. And it was a little heartbreaking. That forced me to let go and forced the letting go. And really what started out as, even in that small experience, I basically grieved her death before she died. And I was hopeful that she might live, but I basically grieved her death and let her go. 3 months into the process, she lived another 9 months. 3 months into, I grieved her as though she was dying and though she was dead. And it wasn't like I was not open, but in that grieving, here's what was interesting. For me, there was no more hope that she would live. I gave up hope. In that giving up hope, I was fully, fully present with her right now. That full presence with her in a way I had never been. Because now it wasn't just about some future. It was about every moment with her was precious. Every moment with her could be the last moment. The reality is, even if we're dying or not, every moment could be the last moment, Anyway, but we forget. But this time it was so real, the sacredness and the preciousness of the journey with my mother, the journey of being in chemo with her. I didn't agree with her being in chemo. I wanted her to do it alternatively, but this was her soul's journey. But I sat with her in chemo, holding her hand, realizing this could be the last time, like last day I'm ever with her. Every moment became so special. Chemo, my dates with my mother in chemo became the best moments of my life. It was in that the preciousness of the moment, the preciousness of the journey, and the lessons from the journey became so rich, became so incredible that I remember telling my mother about 6 months into it. I talked to her and I said, like, I'm so grateful to cancer. So weird. I'm so grateful to cancer because it's given us this connection. And so, just to reiterate, the goal is not the goal. Sometimes the goal that arises is the necessary puzzle piece or the evolutionary, I don't want to say the evolutionary bait for us to go on the journey. And every goal has an evolutionary potential that causes us to evolve and grow. The fertility journey takes us on a journey. It's that journey that is the real success is not the goal. It's the journey and the learning of the lessons. That evolution, no matter whether you achieve the goal or don't achieve the goal, that healing, that clearing, that evolution, when you die, nobody can take from you. Your child will die. You can't take that house, that project with you, but the evolution of your consciousness and the healing and who you became, that will continue, if there is such a thing, into one's next life. That we take with us. And I think that's where I'm encouraging people to focus. That's the goal. It's, in this instance, that is the giving birth to oneself, the real giving birth to oneself, that no one can take away. And to me, that is the purpose of life. We may achieve, we may not achieve. For me, I remember in my early 20s, I was so hell-bent and attached. Like, this was my giving birth. I was going to be the next Oprah and have a talk show that was like Oprah. And I talk about attachment. I dreamt it. I slept it. I went broke chasing this dream, sleeping on friends' couches. I was tracking down, producers and agents from all walks of life in Hollywood. I couldn't imagine it not being any other way. That's the closest thing I could imagine to maybe wanting to have a baby. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Got very close to it happening. I was even offered things, but cut a long story short, it didn't happen. And that took me into a deep depression. And I remember selling everything, shaving my head, going to India, traveling to India, going around the world in search of my own answers. And I think back, had I gotten a show at 22, 23 years old, the truth is I wasn't ready. I wanted it, but when I look back with wisdom now, I wasn't ready. And probably would have imploded, And so sometimes we don't always understand why things are happening the way they are from the perspective of the ego in a particular moment, because we don't see the interconnected, unfolded, multidimensional interconnection of how everything connects to life, and connects to this life, past lives, to our purpose and our evolution. And I know that had I gotten the show, I probably wouldn't have been forced to go as deep spiritually and mentally and emotionally, because I didn't get it and it moved me into a deep depression, that I was forced to search answers, to try to understand who the hell I am and what I'm doing and what the purpose of life is. And that took me for years so deep into my own soul searching and healing and therapy and cleansing and just inner healing at a young age that cracked me open. And I would not have done and be doing what I'm doing now unless I went to some of those depths. And so sometimes we don't understand in the moment, our journey, but that's part of the path of surrender. It's like, okay, I don't understand, but I'm doing my part and I'm available to finding out. And I think that's the journey. And it's not easy, it's not an easy journey, especially when we want what we want.
Wow. Thank you so much, Kute, for being here today and sharing your wisdom with us and all that these experiences have taught you. And I know you've also had an incredible upbringing that also has contributed to your wisdom. And your book's coming out on paperback. Do you want to tell us a little bit about, because it's happening this week, right?
This week, just a nutshell, depending on people listen to the conversation. The paperback version comes out May the 3rd. Go to Amazon. Love for you to check it out. It's a bit of a roadmap in surrender. I order it or pre-order it on Amazon. And then May the 14th, again, depending on when you hear this conversation, I'm doing a very special live event. And I'm going to do something where I'm going to put it on replay so you can still access it. But May the 14th, I'm doing a live, virtual online event. It's called Reinvent Life, really teaching people how to reinvent themselves and let go of the past and connect to their true power. And so people can go to www.kuteblackson.com, my name /reinvent seminar. Just enter your name, email, and receipt info from the paperback. That will give you access to some free gifts as well as the May 14th event. And if it's after that, we'll put a replay so you can get access to the replay. And if people want to know more, my main website, Kute Blackson, Instagram, Kute Blackson, Facebook, Kute Blackson, my podcast, Soul Talk. If people want to go on a deeper dive, twice a year I do an event in Bali called Boundless Bliss, and that's www.boundlessblissbali.com.
And if you're a fan of Kute, which I'm expecting you to be, then please listen to the first episode that we did together, which was, I believe, episode 35 on Wisdom of the Body. And he shares his incredible story even more. We had a pretty long interview. So thank you so much, Kute. It's so good to talk with you and to be with you. And good luck with everything with the book. And thank you so much for the work you're doing. I want to thank you for listening to this show. It brings me great pleasure to provide this content to you. I also want to let you know that I'll be making some very amazing announcements soon. And if you're not already on my email list, then I encourage you to go over to my website and subscribe to my email list
so that I can keep you informed about these announcements that are going to be coming up very soon. So my website is heathergrish.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And I look forward to getting these important announcements to you very soon and connecting. Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. To learn more about my work, visit heathergrish.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.